In 1893, Hyde helped found the Gaelic League to revive the Irish language and Irish culture and to be quite apart from politics.
In een dan oul a chassilehe de gommessen, dershi gena farsente, agus dinnig an oul.
By 1906, the Gaelic League had 900 branches all over Ireland and a membership of 100,000. It had introduced the teaching of Irish into 3,000 schools, and with its language classes, its music and poetry festivals, its summer schools, it could reasonably claim, as one observer did for it, that it was the only national university that Ireland had. But of course, in encouraging Irish consciousness, in conditioning people to think of themselves and look at themselves as Irish, it was creating a mood and an attitude that could one day be very easily turned into a political one. And in spite of the Gaelic League's own disavowal of politics, there were already those who, in tune with this Irish Ireland movement, wanted to create a new political mood too. Among such was Arthur Griffith, who, from being a member of the Celtic Literary Society, started his own newspapers. The United Irishman, in which he at first combined Irish Ireland thinking with emotive thoughts of the rebellion of 1798 and the Fenians, and then Sinn Féin, meaning self-reliance or we ourselves, which Griffith also used for a new small political grouping he headed, but which had no real political success. Sinn Féin lost at North Leitrim the only by-election it fought, with its candidate Dolan heavily defeated. Another very different sort of man, also from the Irish Ireland movement, was Patrick Pearse, a great enthusiast for the Irish language and supporter of the Gaelic League, who started a school at St Enda's, Rathfarnham near Dublin, where pupils were not only taught in Irish, but indoctrinated with a dreamy yet purposeful view of some of the most violent events in Irish history.
He never preached violence per se, but he always did preach Tone's dictum, to break the connection with England. That is my life's endeavour. He always said that there was never a generation of Irishmen that hadn't risen in arms against the oppressors.
And a new generation was now being taught by Pearse and by others in a new nationalist Boy Scout organisation, the FINA, that they had inherited the duty to rise one day for Ireland. While within the Gaelic League, the secret Irish Republican Brotherhood now fostered a nationalist spirit rather at variance with the original, sober, non-political aims of its founders.
The Gaelic League and the Gaelic Athletic Association were great fountains of supply for the new members for the Irish Republican Brotherhood. I joined the Gaelic League when I was about 7 or 8 years of age and kept up contact all through. And through the Gaelic League, of course, I got in touch with some of the IRB men.
I had been thinking rather deeply about it and reading about it and listening to Pearse in his nightly talks to us about Irish history. And I decided to join the IRB, and I was duly sworn in by Pearse.
But extreme nationalism was the pursuit of only a tiny minority in Ireland. For the ordinary Irishman of that day, such concerns were remote, irrelevant, even absurd. His concern was the land, on which a different sort of revolution had been happening. Tenant farmers at last becoming owners of the land they worked. 2 British Acts of Parliament in 1903 and 1909 had much extended the procedure by which the state bought out landlords and gave fair, long-term mortgages to tenants. A growing content in the countryside made it easier for most Irishmen to wait patiently for the day when Home Rule would once again be politically feasible. But there wasn't much social content among the ordinary people of the towns, particularly not among the working classes of Dublin, over half its population. Dublin in 1913 had some of the worst slums in Europe, mostly tenement houses in which a third of the inhabitants lived 6 to a room, with 1 outside tap and 2 outside lavatories for 90 people. The death rate in Dublin was higher than anywhere else in the United Kingdom. Poverty is so general that it was taken for granted as a normal way of life.
We lived all together by courtesy of the pawn shop and the Jewish community. Our mothers, who could have been ministers of finance for any country in the world, managed to juggle affairs. Saturday and Sunday were the days you definitely got a cooked meal. On Saturday, it would be everything friable, black and white pudding, sausage, bacon, anything you can get through a frying pan, we would have that. And on Sunday, it was usually pig's cheek and cabbage. Then the rest of the week would be bread, margarine, tea.
It was against such a background that an Irish labour movement was, by 1913, still having to protest its right to be recognised in trade unions. And the man who, at public meetings, everyone wanted to hear, was the man who'd organised the Irish trade union movement. A Liverpool Irishman, James Larkin, an egocentric, restless man with a passionate concern for Ireland's poor.
He was a big, strong-voiced man, and he used to wave his arms around and emphasise what he'd be doing, you know that type of way. And he'd impress you, and he'd say to you, get up off your knees and stand on your feet. You know, he put life into you.
At the same time, he preached the nationalism of the United Irishmen and Emmet, calling for discipline and crying, "There is a great dawn for Ireland." In identifying nationalist aspirations with those of the working class, Larkin poured contempt on those capitalist parliamentary nationalists who, he said, would have the working classes even more at their mercy under Home Rule. And in 1913, he and his lieutenant, a Republican Socialist Irishman from Edinburgh, James Connolly, found themselves in conflict with capitalist Home Rule class interests in the shape of the Dublin Tramway Company, which used police and military to lock out all workers after a strike for union recognition. Larkin called a big Sunday meeting in O'Connell Street, and when the police banned it, he reminded his workers of an old United Irishman song about meeting with pikes on their shoulders. "I ask you to meet me in O'Connell Street," he said.
He said, "I'll be there," and the people were there. And he was there, dressed with a big beard, you know. And then when he got up at the window, I'm Jim Larkin, you know, and the crowd cheered.
The cheering was about all they had time for. The police had been waiting in the wings, and after they'd broken into the hotel and arrested Larkin...
The police then started in left, right and centre. You see, the police was reinforced by the Royal Irish Constabulary, and they were big, terrible big men, 6'3" and all up, built in proportion, and it's brutal.
An eyewitness described how there was a continual rapping of batons on people's heads, and how from the shrieks and cries you could tell the same thing was happening all the way down O'Connell Street. The riot was followed by 6 months of bitter, long-drawn-out strike and lockout, during which the police had to be used to escort goods from the docks through the Dublin streets, and the poor suffered appallingly from hunger.
This hunger was going on, was terrible. And then along came the Countess Markievicz.
In the uniform of an Irish citizen army, formed to protect the Dublin workers, the Countess Markievicz, born into an Anglo-Irish landed family, married to a Polish count, and dedicated now, with others, to the Dublin poor.